Thank you for joining us. If you enjoy our podcast, please like and subscribe and consider becoming a digital subscriber to the Albuquerque Journal to help us continue to bring you more content like this. You can find this episode and all our podcasts on the Albuquerque Journal website, abqjournal.com, as well as on YouTube, iTunes, Spotify, and SoundCloud. See the show notes for a discount on a digital subscription, and thank you for supporting the Albuquerque Journal, New Mexico's leading local news source. All right, welcome back to another episode of Writer's Block. I am your host, as always, Journal staff writer Sean Reider. Today we had a great conversation with Wyoming beat writer Alex Taylor, covering New Mexico's upcoming game this Saturday against Wyoming. Wyoming is 1-7 and heading into this one, and New Mexico is 3-5. Kind of a big one for New Mexico if they do want to make a bowl. But before we get into that, I do want to, as always, thank our sponsor, New Mexico Shoes. They've been phenomenal to work with. Really appreciate them sponsoring the show. And I want to encourage you all to subscribe to the Journal, either through digital subscriptions, print subscriptions, or on YouTube as well, where we're putting out a lot of this podcast content. You can also find all of our podcast content on all the major podcast platforms, iTunes, Spotify, SoundCloud, the like. And I do want to keep plugging the live show that Jeff Grammer and I have been doing on Mondays after Bronco Mendenhall's weekly press conference, and about 30 to 45 minutes after each football game, whether it's home or road. You can find those live streams on YouTube and X, where we do both. We always post about them in terms of updates if there is a time change and all that. So I encourage you guys to keep coming in and keep watching. We enjoy doing the shows, and I think it's a good way to break down some of the wins and the losses that we're going through this season. But with that being said, really great conversation with Alex Taylor. Looking forward to sharing with you guys right now. Tired of shoes that don't quite fit right? New Mexico Shoes has a solution. Introducing our custom insoles and arch supports made just for you and ready the same day right here in Albuquerque. Perfectly tailored to your feet, enjoy the comfort and support you need. And while you're here, explore a huge selection of top brands. From casual to athletic, we've got the perfect pair waiting for you. Visit newmexicoshoes.com for hours and location details. All right, today I am pleased to be joined by Alex Taylor, Wyoming beat writer for WYO Sports in Laramie. Alex, thanks for coming on, man. Good to hear from you.
Hey, Sean, what's going on, man? I had to bust out the Lions sweatshirt for this.
I appreciate that. I appreciate the sentiment there. But hey, kind of a big one this week for both teams. Wyoming, 1-7, 1-3, is coming to New Mexico, who is 3-5 and 2-2 after last week's 17-6 loss to Colorado State. If you would have told me that these would be these two teams' records the last time we saw each other at Media Days, probably wouldn't have believed you. But yeah, I mean, for Wyoming coming off a 27-25 loss to Utah State, where is Wyoming kind of right now in this season?
Yeah, I think I feel like a lot of it now, obviously, I don't think anybody expected Wyoming to be where they're at now, especially with coming off a 9-win year last year. Obviously, probably one or two plays away from being in the Mountain West Championship game last year. I think with so many return, I think they had 15 returning starters between offense and defense, and obviously a lot of these guys came back to play for Jay Salvell, who was a coordinator last year. So I think this team, I don't think they've given up in a sense. Obviously, there's still the efforts there and everything. There's between injuries and tough schedules and stuff like that. I mean, you're kind of almost to the point of playing. You're kind of looking to the future now at this point. Obviously, you're not bowl eligible. You got a lot of younger guys like Kaden Anderson at quarterback, where you kind of need to use these next 4 or 5 games or 4 games to kind of plan for the future. Obviously, you never know, obviously, with the transfer portal and everything else with college football nowadays. But I think, like I said, these next 4 games are kind of all about kind of taking that step towards next year and trying to figure out what went wrong and what not to do again next year, I guess.
Yeah, and on the note of Kaden Anderson, for our listeners, Kaden Anderson will be the starter during Saturday's game. It'll be a first career start for the redshirt freshman. I think he was like 15 of 24 for 182 yards, no touchdowns and no INTs against Utah State. How has Jay Salvell and offensive coordinator Jay Johnson kind of talked a little bit about that move at this point in the season?
Yeah, it's kind of, if you're asking, I guess my opinion would be it's probably a 3 or 4 games too late. In this situation, I mean, where you're in now, I know obviously they were super high on Evan Svoboda going into this year, and it's obviously just hasn't panned out. He's a good athlete, good runner, but statistically one of the worst quarterbacks in the entire country. He's completing like 47% of his passes on the year. So I think Kaden Anderson gives you it's a different dynamic. Obviously, he's not as run heavy as Evan Svoboda, which Evan Svoboda's like 250 pounds, so that was probably a big part of their offense. So I think you're going to see a lot more pocket passing, and that was kind of the strange thing to me that stuck out was this last weekend, this Utah State game. That was the most playing time that Kaden Anderson has had all year. He played pretty much all but 2 plays of the second half, and I think he ended up with like 10 or 12 carries, that's not his game. He had 2 back-to-back torn ACLs in high school, which is how he got to Wyoming in the first place. Because some schools kind of dropped out of the recruiting sweepstakes for him after those 2 injuries. So I was kind of surprised by that, but it was also, I think it's to kind of keep up the facade of whatever quarterback's in there, we can run or pass. So I think from my perspective, I mean, I think the move is not surprising. I think it should have probably happened sooner, and I think in hindsight, that'll be something Salvell might point to at the end of the year press conference. Is who knows how he plays, but it's kind of you need a spark, and you need it now, I guess.
And from your vantage point, too, I mean, you've mentioned that there have been some injuries, even with a lot of the returning starters and all of that. And then Sabata, I mean, he has, I hope I'm pronouncing that right. He is not, he's not really panned out the way the staff expect and all that. You know, to you, in a more macro sense, I mean, what have the issues been with the offense this year? Because it has been one of the worst in the Mountain West, and it's, I don't think anybody's expecting a really high-flying attack or anything like that, but it just hasn't been serviceable to a certain degree.
Yeah, I think obviously they're not really comparable side by side, but you kind of compare it to Air Force in the sense of when your bread and butter, your running game, you can't get it going. Look at Air Force's struggle. So they're fourth or fifth in the Mountain West in rushing offense, which leads them to being bottom 3 in the entire country in total offense because of that one aspect. And I think it's kind of similar with Wyoming, where for so long they've been able to average 180, 200 rushing yards a game, kind of pretty easily. And I think I don't want to say they got away from that. I think obviously with the injury to Harrison Wyoming, they've had a lot of injuries on the offensive line. I think that's definitely part of it. New offensive coordinator, new quarterback. So it's been a collage of newness. And I think I think opposing defenses now, they've seen how bad Wyoming and Evan Svoboda have struggled moving the ball through the air. So you kind of just dare them to kill you in the air, and it just doesn't work when you're completing 45% of your passes. You think about third down, you have a 45% chance of completing a pass, and that doesn't even picking up the first down. So it's kind of just it's a numbers game at that point. It hasn't looked good, and I think that's the other frustrating part for Jay Salvell is he brought in Jay Johnson from Michigan State. He had the Broyles Award finalist a couple years ago with Kenneth Walker on the scene. Kind of all know how that tenure ended, but
yeah,
it's kind of frustrating. I'm sure it's frustrating for him because nobody wants you don't want to start your head coaching tenure 1-7. And I'm not saying it's not all on him. He definitely shoulders some of that blame, but it's also the people around you. There's just so many elements that have kind of led to a really terrible start to a head coaching tenure.
Yeah, and one of them, I mean, you mentioned the run game right there, too. I don't remember if it was fall camp exactly or right before fall camp when you guys reported up in Laramie, you know, that Harrison Whaley, who popped off for, I think, 191 yards against New Mexico last season, was really good back, one of the better backs in the Mountain West when he had that knee injury or whatever, if I'm not mistaken. Yeah. I mean, how big has it been not having Harrison Whaley this season?
Yeah, he was it was their first scrimmage of fall camp. It was like first or second play of the scrimmage, and he got rolled up on by his own guy. And it was at the time it was told it was relayed to us that it wasn't a long-term injury. And obviously 8 games have gone by, so I would say that's pretty long-term now. He's maintaining his redshirt status, so he can only play. So obviously the next 4 games he's allowed to play in and still come back for another year next year. But that's you mentioned. I mean, think about that New Mexico game last year. That was 190 rushing yards against New Mexico. I know he had 70-yard touchdown run. He did the same thing. It's kind of just that the ability, the breakaway speed, the ability to break off a huge run. Against when they're in Austin playing number 4 ranked Texas last year, he breaks off 70-yard touchdown run. He had a 75-yard touchdown run against App State. So it's kind of that breakaway speed that gives you a lot of play calling freedom after you kind of prove your ability to do that. And Sam Scott, Wyoming's current running back, they'll probably split carries in some capacity, but he's been good. It's just they're just two completely different styles. So I think having them both, Scott's a little banged up. Having them both, obviously that 1-2 punch kind of deal that will be big for them. And obviously, I'm sure Salvo wished that would have been the case 6 games ago, but here we are. I think he could have played last week against Utah State, but they want it to be 100% because he's already at least verbally committed to coming back to Laramie next year. So we'll see.
You mentioned, returning starters on both sides of the ball. I mean, plenty of good returning starters coming back on the defense as well, although they did lose some pretty significant pieces. But guys like Wyatt Eckler are back in the fold and all that too. And it seems like, from my point of view, that the defense honestly has rounded into a pretty serviceable product at this point in the season. But what have some of the struggles? What has been some of the issues with the defense that you're kind of seeing?
Yeah, I think that's really the unit that's been killed the most on injuries. I think Wyatt Eckler, Isaac White, and Rook Brown, nickelback, and the 2 safeties. They played, I think Salvell said, like 2,000 snaps together. It was basically every single play they played. They were on the field together last year, and I think they've been on the field together for 2.5 games this year, just from various injuries. Wyatt Eckler is playing with 2 clubs, because he has 2 broken thumbs on one on each hand. That happened in the same game. So it's kind of just a crazy way that things shake out. Isaac White's been banged up all year. He's questionable. I don't even know if he'll play this weekend. He's questionable. But overall, I think, like San Jose State, for example, you get 4 takeaways in that game, and then Evan Savona comes in, throws an interception on a screen pass in the 4th quarter. So then the defense, you absolutely need to stop. You're down by 10, late or early 4th quarter. They're on their own 15. You need to stop, and then San Jose State just drives 85 yards in 6 plays and goes up 24-7. And obviously at that point, the game's kind of over. So I think there's been flashes. There's definitely been some ups and downs of this overall, especially in the secondary. Like North Texas put up over 500 yards on them down in Denton. I think overall it's been a struggle just to get that consistency and get off the field. I mean, the scoring defense has been a lot better the last 4, especially with how good Utah State's defense or offense is. I think it's a very comparable matchup to New Mexico in the sense of one of the worst defenses in the country, one of the best offenses in the country. And if you would have told Salvo, hey, you're going to hold Utah State to 27 points in Laramie, you'd feel pretty good about that. Unfortunately, you settled for 3 field goals inside of the 15-yard line in the red zone, and that was kind of the difference.
And it seemed like, at some point, like, everybody always knew that, like, Craig Bowl was going to ride off into the sunset. And, that was always going to happen at some point. And it seemed like there was a lot of goodwill towards Salvo kind of going into the season and all that too. And that's just not quite what I'm seeing at this point. Obviously, like 1-7 just does not help. But where is this fan base with Salvo right now?
Yeah, I think that's kind of the part of the problem, I guess, too, is he hasn't been doing himself a ton of favors over the last couple of years. Like I said, it's kind of you can only lose so many games before you try and implement a different approach.
Mm-hmm.
And that's obviously, I'm not saying them being 1-7 is all on the quarterback. I'm not saying that, but at the same time, there's kind of an expectation with fans of, especially now in today's social media world and everything, you want instant results. And I've seen kind of, I think one of the biggest lessons that Jay Salvo probably learned in this first year as a head coach is he named Evan Svoboda. He named him the starting quarterback in December.
Mm-hmm.
So 2 weeks after Craig Bull retires, Salvo's named his predecessor. He names the starting quarterback before spring ball is even scheduled. So then you go into spring, you go into fall, and I'm not saying it affects how Savoda would prepare. There's just no competition though. So I think that was probably one of the things that he probably wouldn't do again. And if you asked him maybe after the season, he would probably tell you he wouldn't do again. But I think those are just some of the decisions. I mean, there's a couple things last week at Utah State, like they were down. Utah State was lining up to kick the game-winning field goal with 30 seconds left. He didn't use his timeout. He decided to use the timeout to ice them with 3 seconds left instead of trying to get the ball back.
Mm-hmm.
And everybody in the stands is chanting to take a timeout, take a timeout. Then I saw Vel about it after the game. He's like, "Yeah, I'll have to look at it." And then on Monday, he's like, "Yeah, I probably would have called the timeout." So I think it's little stuff like that. I mean, obviously and Craig Bull. It's hard to. That's a hard guy to follow up,
Mm-hmm.
especially at a place like Wyoming. I'm not making excuses one way or the other, but it's that's just kind of some of those growing pains of a first-year head coach versus a guy like Craig Bull who built North Dakota State into what it is now, who built Wyoming into what it was the last 10 years. So there's, like I said, there's some growing pains, and I think that from a fan perspective, you would have liked to see less of those in a scenario where you were basically handed the reins, handed the keys to Craig Bull's program, and here we are, 1-7.
Yeah, and you kind of mentioned the 1-7 aspect where like there's still good effort, but you're out of a bowl and all that. How is Wyoming treating this New Mexico game at this point?
Yeah, I think. Well, this is kind of a weird. Historically, this is always a weird matchup for Wyoming. I
Very
feel
weird.
that's
Very weird.
yeah. And I don't even like. And it's like we talked about right at the beginning, but like if you would have told me in July, Wyoming would be going to Albuquerque with what two less wins than New Mexico.
Yeah.
I mean, that's not something I would have had on my bingo card going into the year. And I think, I think now, like I kind of said a little bit, but like at least for me, I think this is Kaden Anderson's first real shot at because last week the Utah State thing was a 2 quarterback thing. So like Savona started, and I guess they had told both quarterbacks before the game. Savona would do 2 drives, Kaden would do the next drive, and then they would ride the hot hand from there. So that alone is a lot of red flags to me for momentum and consistency wise, because you still haven't. I think now Salvel is finally giving Kaden Anderson a true shot and saying, "Hey, you have the game." Obviously, like if you go out and throw 6 interceptions, you probably won't finish the game. But you don't have to worry about getting pulled after a bad pass or or a 3-and-out. We're not going to pull you right away just because you didn't score. So I think that's kind of from my perspective at least, you're kind of building towards the future of seeing what this offense can do with a different quarterback. He's a redshirt freshman, so I mean that's kind of like I said, kind of playing for next year, and also with having Whaley back to see just how much different this offense looks with an all Mountain West caliber running back next to one of the higher rated recruits in Texas before his injury. So I think that's kind of, at least that's kind of my main focus about this week is you're out of bowl eligibility. You're not making the Mountain West championship game, so you might as well start figuring out. These are almost like preseason games for your next season, because who knows who's going to be back here. These are tryouts for, if you want to come back here, you did this, this, and this in the last 4 games. So I don't know. I think that's kind of probably where they're at. At least a lot of the younger guys. I know a lot of these guys are seniors, so it's probably pretty bittersweet to go into these last 4 games with really nothing to play for aside from really the border war, I guess. But
yeah,
it's emotional.
And it is, you know it better than I do. It's crazy to think of, a Wyoming team like that is basically the situation, right? Where you are kind of trying to figure out the future. And yeah, like you said, the border war is huge, but you just don't have a ton to play for down the stretch. With all that being said, all those kind of dynamics factoring in, what kind of prediction do you have for Saturday and why?
Yeah, I think, I guess I probably should have thought about this before. I think it'll be pretty. I think it'll be pretty high score. I mean, even last year, what was it, 30? It was 35 or 27 or something like that.
Yeah, I think it was that. Yeah,
I think it'll be. I mean, just with the way that the season's going for both of these teams, I feel like New Mexico, even after last week's loss, I feel like they have more momentum in a sense of it seems like the pressure just kind of keeps building on this Wyoming team. The more and more, obviously, they lose. And that Air Force win at the time, you always think, like, yeah, Air Force that's a good win. And then you kind of look at their struggles this year. Wyoming's only win is against the worst Air Force team that's been on the field in decades. So I don't know.
It's like 2013, I think, is that's the other 2-10 Air Force team.
Yeah. So at the same time, I think New Mexico has not more to play for, but just more momentum going into this one. I think their offense has the ability to really spread the ball, put the ball all around the field, especially with that quarterback. And I know, he came in for Hopkins last year, right?
Yep.
And they almost let it come back last year with. I don't think they were. And then somebody asked Jay Salvell that on Monday, was like, "Hey, that guy kind of went in and just ran all over you guys. I think he had like 70, 80 yards on the ground." And it's like, are you going to be more prepared for that now? Because this is really like the first dual threat quarterback that they're going to see with that size. And I think I think he'll have a pretty good day. Obviously, I know he has had some interception concerns, I guess, over the year. But I think Wyoming's, besides that San Jose State game, their inability to create takeaways has been a big story. So I think that'll kind of balance out. And then I think with Whaley being back, and I think Anderson at quarterback, I think they'll be able to move the ball a little better. I think New Mexico probably, I don't know what the crowd will look like, but I think New Mexico probably wins by a touchdown or something. I think it'll be pretty high scoring.
Yeah, spread's right about, it opened at a touchdown. It's been, I think it's kind of somewhere 8.5 at this point. So it's gone a little bit in New Mexico's direction too. But yeah, should be an interesting one. And just given the fact that this series is always kind of nuts and there's always been some kind of weird and wild wins on both sides. But Alex, that is all I have for you today, man. I appreciate you coming on, dude.
Yeah, for sure. Just two Michigan guys talking football out west.
I love it, man. I really do. It's awesome.
Yes, sir. I appreciate it.
All right. Thank you, Alex. All right. Hope you enjoyed our conversation with Alex Taylor. Kind of a big one this week for New Mexico in terms of if they do want to make a bowl, and kind of an interesting one for Wyoming. We just have not seen a Wyoming team at this kind of point, at this point with this record at this point. So, yeah, lots going into it. But as always, I do want to thank our sponsor, New Mexico Shoes. They've been great to work with, and I also want to encourage you guys to keep subscribing on all the major platforms and to the Journal itself. And want to replug the other live show that Jeff Graham and I have been doing on YouTube and X. We enjoy doing it. You can find this upcoming live show probably around, I want to say, somewhere between 5:30 and 6. That's when the game should be over and we should be done with our media duties at this point. So, yeah, encourage you guys to keep tuning in, asking questions and the like. But With all that being said, appreciate you guys tuning in as always.